Welcome to Easy Style with Sammy. I'm your host, Sammy Bedell-Mulhern. Each episode, I invite a friend, family member, colleague, or just someone I've met on this journey called life to come and share their personal style and approach to business, parenting, life, and everything in between. You'll hear motivational and inspirational stories that will help you refine and build your own personal style. Remember, style is easy when it comes from within. Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Easy Style with Sammy, and today my guests are Meredith and Craig Bennett. Thanks for being here today.
Oh, thanks for having us, Sammy. We're super excited.
Yeah, pumped to be here. Thank you.
You are my first official couple on the podcast, and I've wanted to do this for some time, so I'm really excited for this conversation. We're playing with, we've got some more gentlemen coming on the podcast this year as well, so I think important to hear all sides of the story, the good, the bad, and the awesome. So why don't you just start by introducing yourselves and tell us a little bit about who you are.
Sure. Well, we're Meredith and Craig, and we are best friends, business partners, and a married couple. So we wear a lot of hats in our relationship. We didn't always. We started off actually working in the same company. We weren't always entrepreneurs. We didn't always have that business partner hat on. And then our company gave us a giant gift of you can move across the country or you can leave. And It was a really stressful decision in the moment, but in hindsight, It was a huge gift. And we ended up leaving the corporate world and trying to figure out this whole entrepreneurship thing once we were out of corporate. And so we kind of jumped out of the plane and decided we would figure out how to build a parachute on the way down. And it wasn't a straight line, I would say. We didn't jump out of corporate, jump right into entrepreneurship and have success.
No, it definitely was not a straight line. There were lots of U-turns and detours and mistakes, but we ultimately realized that we hadn't done the work when we left our corporate jobs to really understand who we were. So that was our main focus when we realized that, was to double down on that, and jumped into entrepreneurship and became relationship experts and coaches.
I love that. So I have some friends who are also in the online business space, and they, one of my good friends, Becky, she was on the podcast. Her husband left his corporate job to come into her business, and now they work together. So I know of several couples where they do this. Personally, for myself, my husband's a huge supporter. I left my corporate job to start my own business without really knowing what I was going to do just yet. He's super supportive, but for us to work together would not be a good thing. So I always admire couples that can make that work. And so I kind of want to talk a little bit about your journey, because, when you messaged me, you mentioned that your first business just was not great for a lot of reasons, right? So why don't you share kind of what that first experience was like and kind of what it took for you to kind of come through that and work your way through that?
It's funny because when we left the corporate job, one of the reasons we left was, one, we didn't want to move across the country further away from all those we love and all the people in our world. But the second thing was there was this sense of unfulfillment with our careers. Like there was this sense of there's more we can give the world, offer the world. And so when we left the corporate job, we still didn't initially do the work to understand what it was on our heart that we wanted to give the world. What was rising up within us was this scarcity of leaving behind our corporate jobs with the income and the salaries and the benefits and all that stuff. And it was like, how do we replace that very quickly? Mm-hmm. And so we jumped into a real estate business that, we did the research and was like, 90% of millionaires can't be wrong. It's they make their wealth in real estate. We got to get into real estate. And so we jumped into this real estate business, and there was an altruistic kind of bend to it where we would help first-time home buyers in a really tough market get their first home and help investors and all this stuff. But what we quickly realized was it was not on our heart to do, even though there was that altruistic bend, it wasn't the thing that we were meant to give the world. And I don't like to use the word hate, but I hated the work that we'd signed up for. It was worse. It was basically our corporate job, but without the corporate paycheck.
Yeah. Right? And so he was miserable, and he knew that, and it was impacting our relationship, right? Like we were starting to get short and with each other, which was not the relationship that we had been super intentional about building all the way along. Like we've both been through the ringer in relationship histories and with our parents and all like we've seen the other side. And so when we got together, we were super intentional about building a really strong foundation, and we had done that. And then up until this point with this, real estate business that we both were miserable in, but we weren't really talking about how miserable we were. We were just kind of taking it out on each other. Finally, he's like, all right, I got to throw the challenge flag. We got to have an uncomfortable conversation. What the heck are we doing? And that's when we realized we were chasing money, right? We were trying to replace our corporate income. And chasing money, I mean, when you chase anything, what happens? It runs away. Chasing money is never a good idea. And number two, we hadn't done the work to figure out who we are, because we were both going through a bit of an identity crisis, leaving our corporate roles, right? We had high performers, top achievers. Like a lot of our identity was tied to our corporate performance. So we lost our identity. So we didn't know who we were. We didn't know who we wanted to be, and we didn't know what we wanted to offer the world. We just knew we had to replace our corporate income like yesterday. And so that, of course, didn't get us anywhere near a place where we felt like we were actually able to contribute, be our best selves, and contribute something meaningful and valuable to the rest of the world. So that's when we decided, okay, close this business. This is not serving us or anybody else. And we need to focus on us. And we kind of stumbled backwards into personal growth.
So it sounds like, okay, so I have two questions. One is, like, when you were leaving your corporate job, was it just an assumption that you were going to stay in business together, or did you have conversations about, like, each individually doing something different? And then the second part to that is, it sounds like in that moment of crisis, you didn't give yourself time to kind of dream or to kind of vision what things might look like if you could do what you wanted. So when you closed down this first business, did you take that time then to be like to dream and kind of think about what that would look like? And then in the second iteration, did you guys ever consider doing business separately, or has it just always been like, we're going to be in business together?
Yes.
Yes to all.
So the answer to your first question, it was never a question that we weren't going to do it together. We always, when we made the decision that we were going to leave our corporate jobs together, we were going to do something together. Our relationship is our foundation. It's our superpower. We always wanted to do something together.
To be honest, we didn't even really consider
the alternative.
It wasn't like it didn't even appear to be an option. Like I didn't even think about it.
Yeah.
Like it didn't even.
We both just defaulted that we were going to do this together.
Yeah,
love that.
And then to answer your second question, yes, when we realized that we hadn't done that dreaming and understand what it is that we actually want and build the life that we actually want. That's when we started, we undertook that work, understanding who we are, who we want to be, and what we want our life to look like and how we want to serve the world. Those were the main ingredients that we then sought to figure out on our journey. And then to answer that question again, no, when we hit the reset button, we still were under the assumption we were doing it all together.
Yeah. The dreaming part, I'm so glad you honed in on that so quickly, because the dreaming part was actually I mean, there was a lot of big missing pieces around our identity and our contribution, but the dreaming part, like we had started to design a real estate company that in no way aligned with our vision of the dream life we wanted to live. Like that was the first big realization that we're building a company that requires us to be right here, right now in this one community doing this one thing. And it's like, that is so far from the life that we envisioned for ourselves. Having left the corporate job, we envisioned more freedom for ourselves, and we immediately put ourselves in a position where we didn't have that immediately because we hadn't actually articulated what we wanted. Like it was kind of, up in the sky somewhere in our brain somewhere, but we didn't actually kind of put pen to paper and say, what does our life in a perfect world, what does our dream life look like? We just never did that work till after.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I have multiple businesses and my main gig is digital marketing strategy for nonprofits. And so when I left my business, that's what I went into. Like it was a very natural leap because for me, it was like, I just want to be able to serve more businesses, more nonprofits, more small businesses versus just working for one. I also realized that I don't work well in a corporate setting, but that's just a whole nother conversation. But that was an easy leap for me. So like for me to start my business was no big deal. And still in that I've had multiple iterations of my business as I've decided what I like to do, what I don't like to do, and who and how I want to serve people. So to have that clear path and have it still be so difficult, I can't imagine kind of the journeys that you guys have been on when you're like, okay, well, we can do whatever we want. We can make up whatever we want and do whatever we want. And so for me, this podcast and Easy Style with Sammy has kind of birthed out of like me needing a different creative outlet to just kind of, this is just my fun project. And so I love this conversation so much because I'm in this iteration right now where I'm like, okay, well, now what do I want to do with this? I've been doing this for a while. Like, how do I want to kind of take it to the next phase? So I kind of love your approach to reverse engineering. This is what I want my life to look like. And now let's put the steps in place for how I'm going to get there. So kind of what did you come up with, and kind of what do you do now that you guys are so excited about?
Well, it's interesting. When we first started the dream work, like we looked at it from multiple lenses. Like, what do we want our relationships to look like, our health and our vitality to look like, our free time and geographically. And then there was the work component. What is it that we want to be doing and how do we want to contribute? And that part, I would say, was the hardest part, most ambiguous. Like, we want to do something together. We want to make the world a better place. You know, it was very...
We want the flexibility of being able to be nomadic, move around a little bit. We don't want to be tied to one place. We want to see the world, travel.
So we didn't have a very specific box yet of what that was. We just had some bigger picture strokes of what we wanted that to look like. And we didn't rush it, I think, was the key part of this part of the journey. Is we had, I say we stumbled kind of backwards into personal growth because when we decided to close that real estate business, we actually had tickets to a real estate conference. So we're like, well, we might as well go to this investing conference and just, see what we learn there. And this conference, which we thought was just like your regular real estate conference, had a real kind of Tony Robbins personal growth vibe to it that we were not expecting. And so we ended up discovering some limiting beliefs about ourselves, both of which kind of centered around not feeling good enough. And so getting to do some of this work, doing that personal growth work separately is a really important piece of figuring out who you are and what your gifts are. But doing it together created a level of closeness we hadn't even yet experienced in our relationship because we dug really deep with each other and shared some of this stuff that we didn't even consciously know about ourselves that we were sharing out loud. So it ended up being really cool. And that was kind of our first toe in the water of personal growth. And so it was fun. It was hard, but it was like we felt the value from it. So we just started going to more of these types of personal growth events. And we found that at these events, people would come up to us, usually one at a time, and say like, you guys are doing this together. That's really cool. I can't get my husband to come. I can't get my wife to come. What do you suggest? And we ended up talking to people, sometimes couples, but mostly people wanting their partner to come along and just answering their questions. And so that was fun for us, but we didn't really realize what we were doing yet. And then at one of these events, the guy putting on the event was like, hey, I think you guys would make great coaches. And we're like, oh yeah, you know what? Yeah, we've been coaching upon looking back, we've been coaching our whole lives. That's a great idea. What would we coach though? Like that part still wasn't clear to us, even though we kind of had been doing it. And then same guy says, at my next event, I actually want you guys to speak on stage about building strong relationships. And we were like, wow. Oh, so our relationship had been our superpower, but it actually is our superpower, like out to the world to help other people. Because what we've come to realize is that having a really thriving relationship, especially as your marriage, but it doesn't have to be your marriage, a really connected, thriving, healthy relationship is a cheat code for life. Like when you don't have to spend the time and energy always fixing, always coming through arguments, always like walking on eggshells, tiptoeing around, trying to avoid the big blow up. When you're not spending that time and energy and focus doing that, and you're in maintenance mode and things are working and flowing, you have so much more time and energy and focus to put out to the rest of the things you want to, the other goals and dreams you have in your life. And the other person does too. So it's this like synergistic, like exponential energy that you now have to level up every other area of your life. So it's a huge cheat code. And that's kind of how we stumbled into coaching, relationship coaching.
It's when if you had asked us to plan it out looking forward, we never would have been able to connect the dots. They only connect looking backwards, right? So anyone who's kind of at this place where they're like, oh, I've got so much freedom and I don't know where to take this, I would say is like surrender a little bit and just go with the flow and because the universe is always kind of working in your favor. And that's one of the biggest lessons that we pulled from this is that things, if you just take action, take a step towards your future, just as small as it is, the next step reveals itself. So we decided, okay, we're going to focus on our own personal growth. We're going to go to an event. And then when we did that, other options opened up for us, other steps. And then we met, this gentleman that Meredith just mentioned, and he kind of pointed us towards coaching and then eventually relationships. And then it all kind of just started to piece together. And then, here we go. This is our gift that we want to give the world. Yeah.
Well, I think, Meredith, you said we kind of stumbled into it at the end of kind of your explanation there. And I feel like that is something we often say. Like I'll say, oh my gosh, I got so lucky. We just landed this big client. Because in the moment, it feels like it just happens out of nowhere. But in reality, to your point, Craig, you're just taking the steps that are being put in front of you. So you are doing the work just because it's not super intentional. So I think what your story teaches us is patience, like leaning into the next best thing and just saying, well, without expectation, right? Like that's something we talk about a lot is have conversations with people without expectation and just see where the conversation leads you. You might be surprised what doors can open for you. And then also like hearing what people say to you about you. Like, this guy said, I'd love for you to come speak about relationships. And, you could, and maybe you did, but you could have immediately responded with, oh no, we can't do that. We've never done that before. That's not something we're experts in. Right. But like leaning into the opportunities that present themselves. I think, like, is that something that you have worked on or were working on in all of these things? Because that's not something that most people feel comfortable in.
Yeah.
And we didn't, for sure.
I would say a couple things is one, it's the power of community, right? Like it's hearing what other people are saying and listening to what they're saying.
New perspective.
Yeah, there's new perspective there. They see things that you don't necessarily see. You're too close, and they have a different perspective, and they can see things you can't. So leveraging that community and that extra perspective that other people have. And then secondly, it really is about saying yes as often as you can. When you're presented with an opportunity, explore it. Like we do have an attitude for adventure. We do. One of our philosophies is we're on an adventure. Like let's just go and explore what this is. It may be something that we go halfway down the path and we're like, not for us. And then we change course and we do something different, but at least explore it because it came up for a reason. It was presented to you for a reason. And so it's really, we've had to hone the skill of understanding the universe is always working for us. This opportunity was presented to us. So let's at least explore that and say yes and go from there.
And we'd never, spoken on a stage before, especially together, but like outside of the corporate in a meeting type of situation, we've never really gotten on stage and spoken before. So that was a scary ask.
Not since like grade 3 when I was doing the assembly or whatever.
So it was scary. And it was similar actually to the feeling of when we left our corporate job, that our corporate job, like we said, we were good at it. Like we were high performers, high achievers, like top performance reviews, like checking all those boxes of what society tells me success is. So we were good at that. Plus it was the only thing we ever knew. And so when the opportunity came to leave, it was really, really scary. And we're high plan, like type A people that like give me a good checklist, make sure I've got it all figured out before I make my next step. And so we didn't have that when we left our corporate job. We just kind of ended up deciding based on this feels like the right thing to do, even though everything around it seems like chaos. Inside, it just feels right. When our friend asked us to speak on stage at his event, it was like, oh my God, what? Like, and he's like, I don't know, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, something like that. And we were like, oh my good Lord. Like, it was terrifying, right? Like getting on stage in front of people talking about relationships of all things for like an hour seemed like a really giant mountain to climb. But at the same time, like it was scary, but it still felt like the right thing. And leading with courage, like I really do believe that when you take the action that feels right, even when you're scared, especially because, you only get to practice courage when you're scared. So especially when you're scared, taking that step forward and practicing being brave, I think is a really important skill.
Yeah. Yeah, it's when you feel that fear, everything we want is on the other side of fear. That's where the growth is. Yeah. So lean into the fear and trust your intuition. That's something that's a skill that we're still honing, because I think for me anyway, it went dormant a little bit in my corporate life. I maybe suppressed it a little bit. And so when the less you listen to it, the harder it is to hear. But when you start to tune into it more, the voice gets a little louder, and you can hear you can have that gut feel. And so lean into that a little bit. And that's a skill I think that you have to really develop.
Practice.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to get into a little nitty gritty here and change course just a little bit, because now that you have your business, you've figured out your passion, you love what you're doing. How do you guys operate inside of the business? Like, do you have very clear, like, this is my role, this is my role, like, and how does that evolve over time as the business grows? Or if you have like a new idea, like, how do you approach that while still like honoring your relationship? Because I think that's one of the trickiest parts is, in a growth phase, growing in the same ways together, both in your relationship and in your business.
Yeah, I would say in the beginning, we did not have a clear differentiation of roles, because we really didn't have a clue what we were doing. So we were just trying to figure it out as we go. And eventually we kind of figured out each other's strengths a little bit, and we've settled into roles kind of day to day. We each have sort of separate things that we own in the business. I think the other key piece of it, especially for couples, like you're saying, is we have a very clear differentiation of when we're no longer at work. Like when we've got the business partner hat on, we're business partners. We're going to challenge each other, and we're going to have conversations, and we're on the same team about what's going to push the business forward, but we may have different opinions on how to do that. And we keep our business partner hat on for the day when we're doing that. And then at the end of the workday, we take that hat off and put our, marriage hat back on. And oftentimes that involves like an actual change of environment. Like we'll get out and go for a walk and kind of debrief, even though like we are literally arm's length away from each other most of the day, we still kind of go on our walk and debrief. Like even on this podcast, right? We are like literally shoulder to shoulder on this podcast, but we'll probably go for a walk later today and debrief how we each experienced it. Like what were each of our highlights, and like, cause we're going to have a different favorite part, and we're going to want to talk about that with each other. And that's part of our sort of transition from business partner to back to like life partner. At the end of the day, let's close the laptops, let's get out and go for a walk, get some fresh air, debrief, kind of put it all to bed for the day, and then spend our evening having fun, like, playing a game, making dinner, doing our thing. And then it allows that, it just allows work not to just creep all the way through everything. So you still get some time, because what's one of our biggest philosophies is you make time for what's important. And this is super duper. This is more important than anything. Like it's this above everything else. And if we're not making time to just hang out and connect and be together outside of work, then we start to lose this. And it's the most important thing.
Yeah. My brother is my business partner, and he will be listening to this because he edits the podcast. And it's not so bad right now. I mean, because obviously we're not married, but it's like a similar kind of like things can bleed over into like family. And when he was living on the West Coast and we were here in Minnesota, he works later in the day than I do. He doesn't have kids. And so he gets up later and works later. So he would be calling me at like 6:00 my time to say, hey, I have questions about this project, or where are we at? And we had to have a very serious conversation about like, I got school pickup starting at 3:00, and then I'm pretty much tapped out because I get up really early. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. I think it's a good lesson just in general in any sort of small business where you only have maybe one or two employees, or you have like one or two key stakeholders or decision makers. That separation of duties and that separation of time and space is so important. So I love that you just have that kind of cut and dry. He got to the point where I was like, I'm not taking your phone calls anymore in the evenings if you're only going to ask me about work. If you want to check in about family stuff, then by all means. And so we found, now he lives in Minnesota also. So like it's much better, but I think that's smart.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have those conversations and those boundaries, and then once everyone's on the same page, things can run a little smoother, right? Yeah. It's when you don't have those conversations and those expectations aren't set, that's when the friction happens. So
Yeah, he doesn't
really
live in my
important.
house. He doesn't know what we're doing. So why would I assume that he would just figure it out on his own, right? And I think I love that you guys go for a walk and kind of debrief, because it's easy to say, okay, well, I'm going to just shut down my computer and we're just going to flip. But the work that you do is also emotional. So I'm sure that as you're working with your clients, that you also just kind of need to process what you experienced and maybe get through some of the emotion that you've been working through. And so to be able to do that together with somebody who also really understands that feeling has to be really helpful to kind of just help you wind down yourself.
100%. Yeah, it is really helpful to be doing the same thing with your spouse for just understanding what you're going through. Mm-hmm. That was really heavy. We just listened to something really heavy. Mm-hmm. So let's go decompress. Let's go for a walk. Let's get out in nature. Let's get the sun on our face, and let's just, talk it through, get it out of ourselves. And then we can go and enjoy the rest of the day together, date night, whatever it happens to be that day. But being entrepreneurs, obviously, different things come up at different times. It's just really about being intentional about, okay, tonight we do have a client meeting where we have to, maybe we're going to have some heavier stuff. So let's make sure we have some time set aside on the weekend where, we've got some set time in our calendar where it's just us time. Mm-hmm. So it's really being flexible, because obviously you have clients and you kind of have to cater to some of their needs and times and stuff like that. But it's also making sure that you're setting aside the time that you have for this as well.
And it's interesting. We're really lucky, I think, because we've always had that. Even in our corporate job, eventually we worked in the same department, like different teams, but in the same larger department. So we knew who all the people were. So on our walk home from work at the end of the day, it was like, oh my God, I had a meeting with this guy and that. And it's like, oh, I know, I had a meeting with him last week. And so it was helpful even in our corporate life that we still used that walk home, because we lived walking distance. We used that walk home as our differentiator then, which I think is what made it easier to carry that over into the entrepreneurship side of things too, because the walk home from work really helped leave things at work. And knowing all the same players in the organization, working in the same company and on the same floor, all the same people. So you could kind of vent and have the other person understand, as opposed to you work at two different companies and you kind of understand who the different people are, but you don't really know them. So it's not quite the same level of connection over the people. So we've been really lucky to have that.
That's amazing. And my husband works in finance and plays in spreadsheets all day. And I am largely in marketing and creative stuff. So we could not be more opposite in what we do. So it's funny because we both work from home. So we'll have moments. Well, he works in the office part of the week, but where we'll knock on each other's door. Do you have 2 seconds? I just need to vent real quick. And then we just spew it out and then we leave. So it's kind of nice to have that. There's not a lot of back and forth, but we at least have figured out that rhythm of I need a minute. But I guess, I'm curious, as you kind of work through this journey and now you feel like you're in a place where you're doing work you love. We all have different seasons in our businesses, seasons that are busier than others, and kind of that ebb and flow. But what are you excited for this year? What is kind of the thing that you guys are looking forward to or working towards? Because you're entrepreneurs now, so it never just is what it is and stays that way. So kind of what's the next step for you all?
So a few things this year that are really got us excited. We just launched a mastermind, so we're leaning heavily into that, and we've created a really great safe space for folks, and we've got a bunch of people in there that we're super pumped for the growth that we're seeing with them. So we're leaning into that and creating content for them specifically, and then
well, actually, I'm going to build on that for a sec. It's new and we're super pumped about it. And it's far exceeded our expectations, because it's a broader, it's called the Infinite Relationship Mastermind. And it's bigger than marriage. Marriage is our bread and butter. We love focusing on marriage for sure. But the skills you use to build and strengthen a great marriage apply in every relationship in your life. It's just often easier to learn them in a marriage, but it's not unique. And so we've started actually the mastermind with the relationship with yourself, because it's the critical one that every other relationship is built on. And so it's been far exceeding our expectations. So we'll get into the other relationships, the other important relationships in their life too, and the relationships with their health, with stress, with fun, with the future, the big important relationships that you have in your life, not just your marriage. So we're super pumped about that. And And then you go ahead, keep going.
So we're also, we have a podcast as well, and we're expanding that. So our podcast is the Road of Life podcast, and we do like 15 to 20 minute episode once a week where we just share a concept about relationships that's really helped us and our clients. And we just put that out to the world. And now we're going to focus on adding another episode a week where we interview other people that are, get their perspectives, and entrepreneurs or corporate folks or, just different perspectives on relationships. And so that's another thing that we're really excited about this year.
Yeah. Again, the same idea of the broader relationships. Like we might have a couple on or a person on talking about the relationship with their health and how that's evolved, or someone talking about their relationship with stress, or someone talking about their relationship with their mom, or like kind of that broader relationship perspective. So we're excited about that. And we also have on the docket this year, we want to write a book. So we've got that coming up as well. Yeah. So those are our three big.
Always impressed with people that want to write books. Somebody approached me about doing a rewrite of their existing books, just to rewrite it for nonprofits specifically instead of the service industry. So I had the whole thing already done. I just had to add a few stories, and I was like, I can't do this. This is too much. So that's impressive, and I'm proud of you for doing that, because that's a lot. That's a big project.
It's a big project.
It is a big project.
We're super excited about it, though. Yeah. We've been talking about it now for a while, and it's like, okay, 2025, we're going to do it.
Yeah, that's so great. Well, this has been such a fun conversation. We could probably talk forever. I love hearing entrepreneurial stories, but I love just your take on everything. It doesn't, like you said, doesn't have to be just with your relationship with your partner, or it can be all the relationships that you have in your life, work related, personal. So thank you so much for sharing your experience and your story with everyone. But if people want to connect with you and learn more about you, your mastermind, check out your podcast, how do they do that?
Well, we are most active and most fun on Instagram, and we're at Meredith and Craig. And our mastermind and our podcast are both on our website at roadoflifecoaching.com.
I love it. And we will link all of that up in the show notes at easystylewithsammy.com/38. But thank you so much for being here today. This was a pleasure.
Oh, the pleasure was all ours, Sammy.
Super. It was an honor. Thank you so much for having us.
We had a lot of fun.
Yeah. Great combo.
Big thank you to Craig and Meredith Bennett for joining me today. What is such a fun conversation. And I just love hearing how couples work together. Like I said, I love my husband. He's very supportive of me and my business ventures, but working together, probably not our thing. But it's just so fascinating to hear how people kind of put things together. And I also love hearing entrepreneurs' stories of how they pull things together, what they come up with. And this one was just such a fun, unique story. And you can tell that the passion behind the work that they do is so strong and so evident, and why they're seeing the success that they're seeing, because it's the passion that is inside. So I really hope that you are inspired by this episode, and that you use it as a reminder to just take a minute to look at where you're at, what you're passionate about, and what you might be able to just take one step forward in. You don't have to go quit your job and leap right in, but what's one thing that's just gnawing at you, or something somebody's been saying to you, or something you just want to pay attention to, and just take that little itty bitty step forward and see where it can take you. Now, like I said, the show notes are at easystylewithsammy.com/38, so you can check out all of the different ways to connect with Meredith and Craig there. While you're here, I would really appreciate you hitting that subscribe button wherever you're listening. Leave us a review if you can, or a comment. And I really thank you for taking time to listen to these stories. If you have somebody that would be great for me to interview on this podcast, you can send that to hello@easystylewithsammy.com. Otherwise, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.